That vacuum pulled down to 450, and so we got 10 120-pound ones. That alone could have been enough to finish.
Alright, it is go time. Now this is where I'm really interested to see, because this is what this pump was really made for. So we've got I think this is around 350 ton centrifugal, holds 1,500 pounds of charge, and we are going to hook up a half-inch connection, 3/4 inch ID hose coming off the drain port down there on the bottom, and we're going to pull down. Now we have got our BluVac set up, and we're testing it against the JB this time, just out of curiosity. So with that, we have a half-inch connection here feeding into the blue hose, coming in to the KF16 fitting, which then is adapted to a KF25.
Pressure test finally went good. We had a handful of just small leaks, so we didn't anticipate. It's not stuff we were working on directly, but just small things that came up because we were moving stuff around. So for example, I should have thought about it, but I just didn't think of it. The terminals for the oil motor terminals for the oil pump ended up leaking, and it makes sense after I thought about it, because that flange is usually hot, 120, 140 degrees, and so we've had it cooled down for 2 weeks now, where it's only been it's probably 70 at best in this room. So that's a lot of change in temperature, which changes the metal quite a bit. So it's not surprising that some of those types of leaks began to form that are usually in a warm part of the system. Once we got done chasing leaks, we did the pressure up to or just shy of 90 pounds. Held it overnight, did perfect, decided to move forward. We got time frames to stick to. We're going to pull the vacuum, get it pulled down. We'll do a standing vacuum test as well, make sure it holds that. Then we've got 1,500 pounds to pump into the system. Now, keep in mind, 200 of that is what we actually recovered. The other 1,300 we're going to go pick up today, get to the job site. That order came in yesterday. We'll get that put in here, and we'll use the NAVAC pump
in order to do push-pull charging via that method. So we'll hook it all up and do all the fancy stuff with it.
Alright, there we go.
Let's get this cap on with some nylon.
Talking to NAVAC, they sent over a bunch of their oil, and so I've got plenty of that going forward. I appreciate those guys for doing that. But in discussion with them, what they're recommending in their practice is not to base changing the oil off of the color or anything else that, their actual practice, because they expect you to get several vacuums out of a single oil, and they encourage you not to think about the oil that they're recommending like we do standard oil, where you change it with every vacuum. At least that's my practice up to this point. Their recommendation is, before each vacuum starts, see if the oil that's in there will pull down to that pump specification. So for example, this pump is able to pull down to ultimate pressure of 4 times 10 over 3 M-bar, whatever the hell that means. Convert that over to microns, and that's what they want you to use as a baseline test. So obviously I've got brand new oil, I'm not worried about that now, but I don't mind trying that practice out. Is it okay? And instead of just changing oil to change oil, and something we've all discussed in the comments is how expensive that is, and this is not cheap oil or anything else to get. And that's part of NAVAC's claim, is that they're not using standard oil, and so you should be able to get more life out of it, which is why it's more expensive. I will be able to put that to the test, because historically I've not been able to get out of just normal off-the-shelf oil more than maybe a vacuum and a half out of it. It's been pretty rare on a system like this that I've been able to pull multiple vacuums on one oil change. Expectations. Let's set some expectations. So right now we're right about 9 o'clock? So we're right at 9. I would expect that we ought to be able to pull down within 8 to 12 hours just with this pump. Usually what I would do is I would take like 2 10s 8s and hook up to a system like this, and I could get this system to pull down in that same time frame. So can this one pump by itself get us down below 500 microns in that 8 to 12 hour window?
This is my first time kind of seeing the BluVac app, and honestly it's pretty interesting. You know, seeing it cycle through, you know, first, second, third, and it looks like there'll be a fourth stage, so 2,000 to 25,000 is third stage. So it's pretty neat, and honestly this JB and this BluVac are almost exactly spot on with each other. So they're a lot closer than what we've seen others, you know, that we've compared thus far. You know, usually they get a little more variance than that. Yeah, this is pretty neat. For those of you who've used BluVac for a long time, I see why. I also see why, you know, it's so expensive. Oh, by the way, it's been 20 minutes and we are down to the 18,000 and dropping. Pretty good numbers. So, and we're hooked up here on the condenser in case that wasn't clear. So this is the top side of the condenser barrel. We can come over here and I'll let you see we're hooked up on the drain port on the bottom of the evap. So we've got a pretty good separation. Since we're pulling vacuum, we need to hook up the oil and suck the oil back into the system, get the sump filled up, and then once we do that, we'll be able to just let this thing run, and we won't touch it again until we're ready to do our final standing testing, and then ISO test and just all this stuff. So let's get the oil in. So in order to do this, we're gonna pull into the drain port. We got 3/8 hose coming down. We'll drop that 3/8 hose into this bucket after we clean it. And my autofocus is freaking out. There we go. That'll be a little better. Word of warning, anytime you're doing stuff like this, you need to make sure that you have clean buckets. So I buy them fresh from the store every time. Make sure they're wiped out, nothing in there. And then we get these sealed buckets, and you have to make sure you get the ones with a gasket in them. So not all of them have the gasket. You have to be very careful. The ones that are up close to the front of the aisles at like Lowe's or Home Depot, a lot of the times those won't have a gasket. You have to go back into the paint section, and that's where those are stored. So if you do it that way, that makes sure that you can get a good solid seal on the oil, and it's not going to allow any contaminants to get in there while you got it sitting stationary. And what's also good about it, and you know the seal's working, is this lid is pressurized, and it's got a heavy bulge to it, and the whole bucket is kind of mushroomed out slightly, and that's because, you know, the little bit of refrigerant that gets trapped in there, once you put the lid on and that refrigerant, you know, evaporates out of it, it helps create a seal to where if there was, say, a leak in the bucket, it's going to push those contaminants away from the oil, not allow it to penetrate into it. So it's a pretty decent little system. Both buckets still have pressure on them. That tells me that the lid's held and kept their seal. So I'm not worried about the oil being contaminated in any way. So one piece of feedback I've gotten on this vacuum pump is that there's one guy in particular who was talking about he wasn't allowed to use this pump in particular customer's plants anymore because it was so bad about, like, it was pumping a fog out, and it would fill the plant up with you know, whatever fog. Like, it was just the vapor exhaust port was just, I don't know, it was outputting a gas regardless. And if I understood his comment correctly, it was even with using the exhaust filter like what I have. And so I don't know. I'm curious. I'd like to see some more conversation about it, because my experience, whether I was up on a roof or in an enclosed plant like I'm in now, I've seen no change. I've not seen anything exhaust out of that. I mean, maybe they've come up with a more recent design, or they've modified some things, or I don't know. Either way, that feedback, I just wanted to respond to it. I was sitting here thinking about it and just let you know that I have not had that experience whatsoever. We got all the oil pulled in the system. It's been 45 minutes with pulling the oil, and we're at 4,500 on the JB and 1,500 on the BluVac. So at this point, it just comes down to a straight pull. Now this is obviously going to have an impact because, well, it's got to process that oil and us adding the oil. What's interesting though is how much it still pulled down even though we were pulling in oil. Numbers. One, BluVac, that was a freaking awesome Micron gauge. I get why it costs so much. I get why it's such a thing.
I didn't take the time, but the whole decay and charting and graph stuff, like, that's pretty awesome. I'll do more content on that in the future. I'm not going to make this video all about that. But that vacuum pulled down to 450 in 5 hours. We did isolation tests. We didn't rise more than 100, or we rose less than 100 microns. So that's absolutely phenomenal. We got a very tight system. Very happy with where we're at. Right now we are dumping vapor back into it. It's really late in the day at this point, so we're just going to get it out of a vacuum. We'll get a vapor charge on the system. When we come back in the morning, then we'll take and we'll start charging all of these 134 cans. So we got 10 120 pound 134 drums, and that'll be on top of the 200 that we got out. So a total of 1,500 is the total final weight we'll have.
We got all the components hooked up. We got about 5 psi on the system. So we've put the vapor out of these two 120s that we had recovered. So we're going to use the rest of the vapor off of this bigger one. And from there, disconnects on. We're going to turn this disconnect on. And one of our goals is we need to make sure that we get power to the machine. One, we can verify all the sensors we had to change, but two, we want to get that oil heater going. So if we're going to be doing startup tomorrow morning or by lunch tomorrow, we got to get our oil up to temperature. So everything looks fine so far. Temps look good there. I replaced all these. Pressures are on point. Oil pressures 0, 0. Temperatures are good, pressures are good. Alright, yep, oil heater. So we just realized why our plate broke. So technically this is the third video in the series, but our oil plate there holding up the sump snapped there at the seam. And we've been trying to figure out, why. Now, it could have had a hairline stress fracture, whatever. Lots of reasons as to why it could have broke, but
it wasn't like that for a long time, and there was no solid justification as to what happened, because we had this chiller off for like 3 or 4 months and it wasn't running. But I didn't think about something.
I say I didn't think about it. Honestly, it's more of I just forgot it even existed. But this has a oil seal lubrication. It's got it with a standby lube feature enabled. So once every 24 hours, it's going to run that pump for a couple of minutes to lubricate all the oil system, and it's going to do that. So every single day it was doing that. Well, during that time, if that bracket was already weak, it had the hairline fracture created, that pump generates enough vibration, especially if it was an older pump, maybe it was having some kind of minor bearing issue at the time. Just the vibration of that alone could have been enough to finish the stress fracture off and then drop all the weight, which would explain how we go from everything working fine, we did not have this leak when I was here last, to now all of a sudden we have this leak and it's a big problem. Makes total sense and complete sense at that. The critical point is at least we can give the customer some kind of justified theory as to why this happened, other than, hey, it happened, I'm sorry, I don't have to tell you. I don't like that if I can avoid it, just because I feel we should, as quality technicians, be able to properly back up whatever our diagnosis is and why we're recommending what we are. Anyway, without getting off on a rant, I feel very comfortable saying that standby lube could have definitely justified what was already a broke plate breaking further and then creating the leak when nobody was looking or paying attention. And our oil heater is doing its job. So we're up to 168. We started it at 168. Geez. We're up to 68. We started at 63. It's only been a few minutes. This is the oil pump VSD. At some point, somebody has worked on this system in the past, and they swapped the legs on M1 and M2 outputs going to the motor. Well, we put everything back and wired it in exactly to diagrams and specifications, so that tells me that somebody, last time they worked on it, didn't do that, or something happened. I don't know what happened. Regardless, they didn't follow the schematic. So because of that, they had to switch 2 legs in here to get the proper direction. Well, we didn't catch that. We tested the oil pump and it didn't produce any pressure. We came in here and sure enough, yeah, M1, M2 were backwards. So we got a little bit of a crazy idea. Hope you don't
bothered the audio change too much. I'll talk about that later. Anyway, we're gonna try to hook all of these tanks up in series with each other and just see what happens, and do this via push-pull. So we've got 10 of these tanks. We've got one of these 200s. These are technically only on vapor. Ideally, we can push-pull all of these, get all of our liquid in the system, and then we would be able to just turn around, hook up vapor, and then pull all of our vapor back in. One of the fun facts about doing what we do, though, is we get to do experiments like this. You know, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. No harm, no foul. We didn't spend that much time setting it up. But if it does work, we're gonna save a ton of time, especially with the way that this recovery machine is able to move refrigerant. So a conversation that has come up in the comments is, you know, some of the NAVAC stuff that you guys are looking at that I'm working with is also stuff you can find through some overseas sources. An example that I saw brought up, not only about the Micron gauge, but also about the recovery machine here, the NRDC4M. They're just cheap rebranded stuff, and that you can buy the stuff for super cheap overseas and get it fraction of the price, so forth, so forth, you know, and we see that commonly with a lot of US based stuff, right? People make the claim that it's US originated all the time. I take that stuff very seriously because I'm genuinely trying to bring a very neutral perspective. Yeah, NAVAC supplied all this stuff, and I really appreciate them for that, but they also understood up front that I'm not going to do this necessarily their way. And while I'll respect some just kind of general rules that they asked me to, I'm going to do this in the most authentic way that I can, because ultimately, if this is a good product, then a good product should stand on its own. I shouldn't have to sell it to you. I believe that, you know, with a good product, it can make our lives better as technicians. And that's just a very genuine thought process that I have as to how this whole process should work. I also believe that, you know, guys in my position and those of us that are doing this have a responsibility to be as authentic as possible so that we can hold brands accountable when we need to. For example, you know, I have talked to one of my technicians, and he's not a fan of the NAVAC Micron gauge. And just in his preference, he's had some issues with the NAVAC specific gauge. So he personally would choose not to use that one. He's liked some others better. And that's okay, you know, that's part of my long-term testing that I plan to do. I took this to NAVAC, and I had a fairly lengthy conversation with Andrew Greaves, actually, when he told me that actually, while it has some truth to the statement, it's not the whole story. And what I'm about to tell you is not anything that NAVAC is hiding from or anything else, but at the end of the day, they don't see it as truly relevant, and I understand why. Genuinely, from an American perspective and how we view products and we do what we do, you know, we have a very negative view over anything foreign or overseas or so forth, and rightfully so. A lot of us have been heavily burned by very bad overseas products. NAVAC is a American-based and American brand, and they function here in the U.S. And everything that they have is U.S.-based. They are a U.S. company. Most anybody is owned by somebody else at the end of the day. They do not technically own themselves. What am I getting at? NAVAC is owned on a high corporate level by Value, the corporate company known as Value overseas, and they have their own marketing and their own branding, and they do not market here in the U.S. They have their own branding for their overseas stuff. NAVAC will help develop and come up with a product line and launch it. For example, you know, these pumps, they will develop that, and if they have a successful market here in the U.S., for example, they will then take and rebrand that for the Value brand and sell it overseas as well. And that's the overall gist of how that company relationship works. But at the end of the day, the products that NAVAC is selling are still products that NAVAC personally participated in the development of and was just a part of the overall process is my point. I'm going to take a step here, and I've talked about things like Amazon in the past on my channel, and the fact that especially for young guys, they have really good products. And I know that all of us, including myself, heavily believe in US-based products. It is something that is a genuine thing for me. I also have to point out just the reality of our modern culture and the fact that that's just not how it is today. So the realities of our modern culture is that almost everything we purchase is produced overseas in some way. And even vast majority of the brands who claim American made, you know, at best are usually American assembled. They're rarely even actually American made products, you know, genuinely manufactured here. And in my opinion, you know, I think that's just a marketing ploy. If you want to claim American made, but it was actually only just put together here, is it actually American made, right? Do you see the moral dilemma we kind of get into at that point? You know, can you look at NAVAC in a negative light for being associated with an overseas company and having overseas manufacturing, right? I'm putting my hands on the product. I'm here working with it now, and you're seeing my experience as I do it. And if there's problems I have with it, I'm going to bring it to you. I do have one thing that came up that I'm discussing with NAVAC, and we're talking through maybe that it's not that it was wrong, but they may want to update their literature a little bit, and it's now created a discussion that we can work together on. And I'll talk about that. It has to do with the A/B settings on the recovery machine, but I'll get to that in a little bit. The product works, and it works really well. I've had fantastic results with it. At the end of the day, if the product does as advertised, at what point does it matter anymore? Now guys, I need you to hear me. I am a grassroots, American believing person that is just genuinely who I am, what I believe. I am a backwoods boy who wants things to be here because I understand that American made is good economics for America, but at the same time, I can't change the fact of what has happened on a cultural scale and the fact that we don't manufacture the way we used to. I'm not trying to justify NAVAC here, and I don't want to be misunderstood. That's the reason why I'm harping on this so strongly. Nobody deserves to be justified, but what I am challenging is your personal line of thought, because I don't want you to get stuck in a place where you're deceived by marketing, because that's what happens in my opinion a lot, is we can get deceived by the marketing that people want us to believe because it benefits their personal agenda. There's your official response. Take it for what you will. If I'm just a hack at this point, then fine, I'll be your hack, you know. We all gotta be angry at somebody at some point anyway. I am very interested in the conversation. If anybody has any further input towards it, I'm just gonna keep digging a hole at this point. So let me shut up and get back to work. Actually, let me bring you down here and show you what we got going on now. Those core depressors, they slow down progress dramatically. Always make sure that kind of stuff's taken out. Anything that's gonna get in the way, that's gonna restrict your flow, you do not want in the way. Let me walk you through what we got real fast. We are doing a push-pull. So this is our drain port on the bottom of the evap. We're coming up to our first tank's liquid line. We're coming from there out of the vapor into the liquid of this tank, vapor to liquid, vapor to liquid, vapor to liquid, vapor to liquid, so forth all the way down till we get to this tank. Now we're pulling vapor off of the top of the evaporator through the NAVAC recovery and then back into this tank's vapor. And that will complete our cycle. And so this tank we're gonna push vapor into from the chiller, and that's gonna force the liquid through and force it through and force it through and force it through and through and through and through. This is not gonna get absolutely all of our liquid. So what we'll do is we'll do this until we get all of our refrigerant into the system. Just need to bleed this first. Open that. It's good to go. We have already purged everything in the system. Let's open this ball valve. We're in the A port. We're gonna hit the go button, and we're gonna cycle over to push pull. So this hose is booking it. I can feel it. I can feel we're flowing here. So I got clarification as to exactly what these knobs are doing a little more. The first thing, on the push-pull, what makes the push-pull setting different from the recovery setting is the push-pull bypasses the subcooler on the back. So there's a set of valves internally that will skip that cooler in order to not have it restrict anything in the system, which if you're doing a push-pull method, you don't really need a subcooler to begin with. So that's what that push-pull is going to give you. And then if you go through recovery, obviously your refrigerant flow is going through the subcooler at that point. And then on the AB setting of this knob, and why we got some weird numbers, if you remember back whenever we were doing the recovery and I said I was going to reach out to NAVAC and ask them about it, the B setting is supposed to be faster for vapor per their recommendations. Well, the way I was thinking about it was slightly skewed and not 100% correct. So the overall design of the pump, there's actually two pumps in there, which I think a commenter even pointed out at some point. But those two pumps are piped parallel with each other. So you've got two separate ones that are pumping through parallel, and that's how they're able to get a 4 cylinders. Technically 2-cylinder pumps pumping side by side. So when you're in the A setting, that's what you're doing, is you're running through both of those pumps parallel, and it's just a constant pass-through feed. Per their engineering theory, by switching to the B setting, it's actually changing up the valving internally on the pump and making it to where pump 1 actually runs in series through pump 2, and it does like a stage pumping instead. Now, the mistake I was making was just thinking of it in pure terms of vapor, but their actual purpose and goal is to help when you have very low volume left in the system. So when you start to get real low on your pressure, that means you have very low refrigerant volume. And so on a smaller system, their 37 PSI rating might make more sense. And you might see it actually increase when you get down to that upper 30s range. But when you're working on a centrifugal or a larger system like this, that 30s range, there's still a lot of volume, even though it's a lower pressure. So we're going to be doing some testing, and this is something that I want to work on, and I'm going to try to see if I can find a better sweet spot, you know, and maybe it's something more specific to the heavy commercial side, that if you're doing, like, say, smaller RTUs, it would mean a lot less to you. But a more accurate number might be something like 20 or 25 PSI on that final recovery. And so the point is, when you get down to that very tiny amount of vapor left, as a means of speeding up that last little bit, by running those pumps in series, theoretically, it should increase that last little bit of pressure's pull down versus having them remain in parallel, which is where you get more total volume, which makes a ton of sense as to why it slowed down, because even though I still had a lot of volume to pull, I technically turned my 4-cylinder pump into more of a 2-cylinder staged pump, which is obviously going to move less refrigerant if you have enough volume to feed it. I didn't point it out, but we started at about 9:10, 9:15, so we're essentially 15-20 minutes-ish into it. Once we actually pump all the liquid through, we will then stop. We will reconfigure the hoses, and then we will do a vapor pull on all of this instead, and that'll finish off the recovery. Is we'll finish off the last bit via vapor. And one of the issues you have is these tanks, I mean, none of them will you actually get all the liquid. You will still have a little bit of liquid because those pickup tubes stick up a couple of inches off the bottom of the tank itself. You will always have some residual in there that the only way to get out is through just a vapor pull it off. That's legit your only option. So it's been just over an hour. Let's do a quick update. So we're still pumping away, but right now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 tanks in just over an hour. I don't feel any standing liquid left in those. And another piece of it is they're getting warm, so that's another indicator. Now with the way this is working, these tanks that have got all the liquid out of them are getting warm to the touch, and we're running about 140 PSI on the vapor side coming into these tanks. while our chiller is still sitting at about, what is it, 40, we got 47, 46 on the chiller itself. So we got a pretty good differential there. And the discharge gases, so I'm doing push-pull, which means I'm not going through the subcooler on this recovery machine, which is gonna help me in this particular regard because I want that extra heat to push into these tanks because that's gonna help get that refrigerant to move. I wish I'd have brought the thermal camera, so I had a company send me one that plugs into the smartphone. I'm gonna be testing it. You'll see some stuff on it here soon. I wish I'd have brought it today. I didn't think about it because it would have been really interesting to get a thermal image of this as everything is moving, and technically we could have seen all of the liquid filling in and out. And that's actually something I think I want to experiment with and try to do more of, is as we're doing recoveries or doing charging or anything else, using thermal imaging to help judge just how fast and how well things are moving, and to get more of a perspective as to how well whatever procedure we're using is actually functioning. That's just absurd. We did 1,300 pounds in less than 2 hours. That's, well, granted, I say 1,300. We did all of the liquid on these tanks in less than 2 hours. I mean, just, it's ridiculous. Those numbers are just absurd. With this liquid valve closed, we'll be able to then, so basically from here, pulling back all the way through, we will be able to pull all the vapor back down. That's really all we got left. I'm gonna bypass the subcooler, so even though we're not actually doing a push-pull, now that I have an understanding of what that push-pull setting does, I'm gonna set it to push-pull because we're not gonna build heat by pumping into this evaporator. And you can do the same thing on like a condenser coil or something. I don't need to worry about subcooling the discharge gas coming out of the pump. So what that'll do is that's gonna remove the coil as a restriction. All right, so we have finished pulling everything down. All of these tanks are empty. We ended up actually taking lunch while we were doing it. Came back and they were all pulled down. Part of what I did is we were pulled to a negative 10 on the coming into the pump. So before we completely disconnected everything, I wanted to just verify and prove that we were actually completely done on the tank. So sometimes these tanks can pull into a little bit of a vacuum, but still have some liquid boiling off. So we let it sit for several minutes, and we were not rising in pressure at all on our tanks on the suction side of the system. For those of you who have an interest in like the audio stuff, so I'm expecting a pretty dramatic sound difference right now versus what you've probably been hearing for quite a while now on the channel. That's because I've gone back to using some wireless, you know, I guess lapel or lavalier mics, whatever the term is. Anyway, the reason I quit using them was I mistakenly ramped the gain all the way up on them, and apparently when you do that, that makes their range that they pick up other sounds like really broad. So I always had massive problems with a ton of background noise and interference on job sites. So I just thought, well, crap, I can't use that. Well, it turns out if I just don't turn the gain up, actually, if I do the gain in the camera and let the camera pick up the signal but leave the mic gain turned down, it works much better. And watching my audio charts as I'm filming is proof that my voice ought to be better. Anyway, if you notice, if you care, some people find that interesting. If you don't, I'm sorry, I wasted your time. I'll move on. If you don't know what these fittings are called, so these are referred to as a tank adapter. Now, a lot of these, you have two ways of doing this. You want to make sure you always have the little gasket in there, but in some cases, we found that these gaskets have trouble. So we have found that you can use a O-ring, and part of it is there's a little indentation groove on here. That groove should be a place for an O-ring to sit. So anytime we have problems with the little gaskets they come with, or say we lose them, we can put these just nitrile O-rings in, and they stand up just fine. You know, especially for just like a one-time use. I wouldn't use it repeatedly, but it gets you out of a bind at minimum. But yes, tank adapters. So you can buy these tank adapters in various sizes. The adapter size itself is fairly standard. So you can get it 1/4 inch or 3/8. I think you can even get them in 1/2 inch. We just carry specifically 1/4 and 3/8 is our kind of everyday, easy to go through. The charge is done. We are ready for startup. And come over to our oil screen. Up to 112 on temp, that's good. We're not even calling for the heater. We need to go up and shut down the temporary chillers. So far we've got the valves, everything open back up and balanced on this chiller. When we turn those off, we'll close the ISOs here in the plant, and that'll get our water shut off so that we can then focus the water on this chiller like we need to. We will need to calibrate some things, make sure that everything is tuned in where it needs to be, so we'll go through that once we get done up there. All right, it is the moment of truth. Kick over, hit go. All right, we got pre-lube. Let's go to our oil. So the things I mentioned we need to do a calibration on is the refrigerant liquid level sensor. The old sensor was bad. We were able to verify that as we were replacing it. So during the recovery process, it was still showing we had liquid level when we absolutely did not. Want to make sure that our oil temp stays up. Pump's running 32 hertz. We're starting to hone in on the set point there. Now we're starting to spin up. Little motor. Right now we got, a decent enough load. We're gonna leave it at 44 set point. Our condenser water is really cold, but we've been flowing water on the condenser while we were doing the charging, so it's gonna have to heat that up, but shouldn't take very long, honestly. So we're looking fine so far. Oil pressure's maintaining. We're only doing 31 hertz. It's perfect. We can look in here, see if we got anything. Oh yeah, we are bubbling. So you can see the refrigerant, got plenty of activity in there. That's good. All right, honestly, we were looking just fine. We just cycled on set point. We did have to make some calibration adjustments. So because we replaced the PR or the liquid level sensor, the old sensor was having problems, and I had to make some adjustments to the old metering valve actuator, which that got done. Anyway, we replaced that actuator as well. I had to calibrate the actuator position so that the chiller had the correct position in order to control liquid level better. Regardless, those are just some minor adjustments we had to make. Not that big a deal. We just have a really low load. It's pulling down, it's cycling, everything's looking just fine. What we are going to do is, it is fairly cold out. We're gonna run this at a 48 degree set point, and this will help us maintain a more stable building. So we're going to shut down at 46. We're going to restart at 52. All right, so 4 degrees. I'm going to turn that 4 into 6. So 6 degrees, restart, shut down 2 degrees. At this point, there's not much else to do other than let it run. We're going to finish packing up. We'll let the customer know that she's doing her job. I'm not going to be able to calibrate the liquid level sensor until we have some legitimate load on this machine. So something we'll do is when we come back to do our probably an annual PM in the spring, we'll plan to calibrate the liquid level. But I took it back to a default of 50%. This machine with the other sensor before it went bad was running a 50% set point and was spot on the condenser. Appreciate you just listening to me rant and talk. Hope you enjoyed this project, and I will catch y'all in the future.